Elijah Thornton stood at his wife's grave on the 8th anniversary of her death, holding a fistful of wildflowers he'd picked at dawn. His hand shook. Not from age. Not from cold. From the weight of 8 summers standing in this exact spot, saying nothing because there was nothing left to say. He placed the flowers down. He pressed his palm flat against the wooden cross, and he whispered the same 3 words he'd whispered every year since they put her in the ground. I'm still here. But this summer something was different. This summer a wagon was rolling toward Cooperton with a woman who would crack open everything he'd sealed shut. If this story moves you, please subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell. Follow along until the very last word, because this one doesn't end where you think it will. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The summer of 1876 came down on Cooperton, Texas, like a punishment from God himself. Elijah Thornton had lived through 40 summers in his life, but this one felt personal. The kind of heat that didn't just sit on your skin, it crawled inside your chest and stayed there, pressing against your ribs until breathing felt like work. He rode into town every second Saturday. Not because he wanted company, not because he enjoyed the dust and the noise and the way people looked at him, half pity, half fear, like he was something dangerous that might bite if you got too close. He came for flour, salt, tobacco, the things a man couldn't grow or kill on his own land. He paid his money. He loaded his saddlebag. He rode out before anyone could say more than 3 words to him. The people of Cooperton had stopped trying years ago. Old Hank Dawson, who ran the general store, used to ask how he was holding up. He'd asked exactly twice. Both times Eli had looked at him with those gray eyes that seemed to see through walls, said nothing, and walked out. Hank stopped asking. Sheriff Tom Reeves once invited him to Sunday supper. Martha would have wanted you to eat with people, Eli. Eli had looked at him for a long moment. Then he'd said, "Don't use her name," and walked away. Tom never mentioned Martha again. The women of Cooperton had tried harder in their way. Widow Patterson brought a pie to his door 3 years ago. He'd thanked her politely, taken the pie, and closed the door in her face. She found the empty pie dish on her porch the next morning, cleaned and wrapped in cloth with no note. She told everyone at church that Elijah Thornton was a lost cause. Stone Man, they called him now. Not to his face, never to his face, but in the whispered conversations at the general store, in the knowing looks exchanged when his horse appeared on the main road. He knew what they called him. He didn't care. Caring required something he'd buried 8 years ago in the ground beside his wife and daughter. That Saturday morning, Eli tied his horse outside Hank's store and stepped onto the wooden boardwalk. His boots hit the planks with a slow, heavy rhythm. He didn't look left. He didn't look right. He pushed open the door and walked straight to the counter. Hank looked up from his ledger. "Morning, Mr. Thornton." "Morning." Eli pulled a folded paper from his shirt pocket and set it flat on the counter. "Just what's on the list?" Hank took the paper without a word. He'd long since stopped making conversation about the weather or the town gossip or anything at all. He moved to the back shelves with the efficiency of a man who had accepted the terms of an arrangement he hadn't chosen. Eli stood at the counter and waited. The bell above the door rang. He didn't turn around. He heard footsteps. Heavy ones measured. And then a woman's voice, slightly out of breath. "Excuse me, is this the general store?" Hank's voice came from somewhere behind the flour sacks. "Yes, ma'am. Yes. Be right with you." More footsteps. Lighter ones, now children. 2 sets. "Mama, look at all the candy." "Lucy, don't touch anything." "But Mama..." "I said don't touch." Eli kept his eyes forward. He heard movement behind him, the rustle of a dress, the creak of floorboards under weight. Then a small voice very close to his elbow. "Mister." He looked down. A girl was standing there. 6 years old, maybe 7. Round face. Brown curls escaping from a ribbon. Big dark eyes looking up at him with absolutely no fear. "Mister, are you a cowboy?" Eli stared at her. "Lucy." The woman's voice again, sharper now. "I'm so sorry, sir. Lucy, come here this instant." The girl didn't move. She was still looking at Eli with that direct, unblinking stare that children have before they learn to be afraid of things they don't understand. "You look like a cowboy," she said. "You got the hat and everything." "Lucy Mae Brennan. I said come here." The girl sighed dramatically and turned away. "I was just asking Mama." Eli watched her go. He saw the woman then. She was standing near the center of the store, one hand on the shoulder of a boy about 9 or 10. Dark-haired, serious-faced, watching Eli with careful, measuring eyes. But it was the woman herself who caught Eli's attention. She wasn't what he expected. She was substantial. That was the word that came to him. Rounded at the hips, full through the chest, with the kind of softness that came from bearing children and feeding them and holding them through long nights. Her dress was clean, but worn thin at the elbows. Auburn hair pinned back from a face flushed with heat, a few damp strands curling at her temples. She wasn't beautiful, not in the way the word was usually meant, but there was something in her face, something tired and determined, and absolutely unwilling to break, that made him look longer than he should have. She met his eyes. She didn't flinch. Most people flinched. Sooner or later, everyone in Cooperton looked at Elijah Thornton and understood that the space inside him was occupied by something cold and old and refusing. They felt it, and they stepped back. This woman looked at him like she was still deciding. He didn't know what to do with that. "I apologize for my daughter," she said. Her voice was steady. "She hasn't learned yet that not everyone wants to talk to strangers." "No trouble. I'm Rosemary Brennan, Rosie." She didn't offer her hand. Her other hand was holding the girl's shoulder now, keeping her in place. "We just arrived in town this morning. We're looking for the Hendricks property, about 3 miles north near the creek." Eli knew the property. Old man Hendricks had died last winter. No family, no will, that made sense. The land had sat empty for months. "I know where it is," he said. "Would you be able to point us in the right direction? The man at the train station gave us directions, but I think we took a wrong turn somewhere." Eli looked at her, at the sweat on her brow, and the dust on her dress, and the 2 children pressed close to her sides. At the way she held herself straight-backed, chin up, like she was daring the world to knock her down. "North Road out of town," he said. "Past the blacksmith. Fork left at the big oak. Follow the creek." "Thank you." She paused. "I didn't catch your name." "Didn't give it." Something flickered in her eyes. Not hurt exactly. Something closer to recognition. "Fair enough," she said. "Thank you anyway, sir." She turned to gather her children. The boy was still watching Eli with those serious dark eyes. The girl was trying to edge back toward the candy jars. Hank came back with Eli's order. "Here you are, Mr. Thornton. Salt, flour, tobacco." Thornton. He saw the woman register the name, saw something shift in her expression. Not recognition exactly, but attention. The kind of attention people paid when they'd heard a name before and were trying to remember where. He paid Hank. He took his saddlebag. He walked toward the door. He was almost there when the girl's voice rang out again. "Bye, Mr. Cowboy." He stopped. He didn't turn around. "Lucy?" the woman said, exasperated. "His name is Mr. Thornton, not Mr. Cowboy." "But he looks like a cowboy." Eli pushed through the door and stepped out into the blazing heat. He untied his horse, mounted up, and rode north without looking back. But something in his chest had shifted. A door he'd nailed shut years ago had rattled in its frame. He didn't like it. He didn't like it one bit. Eli spent the next 3 days doing what he always did when something got under his skin, working himself to exhaustion. He repaired the barn roof in the full heat of the afternoon. He dug out a blocked irrigation channel until his shoulders burned. He rode his fence line twice in one day, checking posts he'd checked the week before. It didn't work. The woman's face kept finding him. Not in a romantic way, nothing so simple as that. More like a splinter under the skin. Something foreign that didn't belong in the careful structure he'd built. She had looked at him like she was still deciding. Nobody looked at him like that anymore. On the fourth day, Eli rode out to check the east fence line near the creek. The Hendricks property bordered his land. There had bordered it for 15 years, while old Hendricks slowly drank himself to death and let his ranch fall apart. The fence between their properties had been falling down for years. Eli had maintained his side. He hadn't touched Hendricks' side. Wasn't his business. He came around the bend of the creek and stopped. There she was, Rosemary Brennan on her knees in the dirt wrestling with a fence post that was rotted clean through. Her sleeves were rolled to the elbows. Her face was red with heat and effort, and she was attacking the post with a claw hammer like it had personally offended her. The boy, Samuel Eli, remembered hearing her call him, was carrying a bucket of water from the creek, walking slow and careful, trying not to spill. The girl was sitting in the grass nearby, talking to a rag doll with enormous seriousness. None of them had heard him approach. Eli sat on his horse and watched. He should ride on. He knew that. This wasn't his business. The woman had bought the property. The fence was her problem now. But she was doing it wrong. She was trying to pull the nails out of a post that was rotted so badly it would fall apart the moment she got them free. The nails weren't the problem. The post was the problem. "You're doing it wrong," he heard himself say. She startled. Her head came up fast, one hand going to her chest. When she saw him, the surprise settled into something composed. She didn't look embarrassed to be caught on her knees in the dirt, sweating through her dress. "Excuse me, the nail." He nodded toward her work. "If the post is rotted through, the nail isn't your problem. The post is." She looked at the post, then back at him. "Do you always ride up on people and tell them they're doing things wrong? Only when they are." Something flickered across her face. It might have been annoyance. It might have been amusement. "Mr. Thornton, isn't it?" She stood up and brushed the dirt from her knees. "I heard about you in town." "Did you?" "The man at the blacksmith said you own the property next to mine. Said you've been here 15 years. She pushed a strand of hair from her face. "Said you don't talk much." "He's right. He also said you're the best rancher in the county." She looked at him steadily. "He said if anyone would know how to fix a fence properly, it'd be you." Eli said nothing. "I wasn't planning to ask for help," she continued. "I've got 2 hands and I can learn. But since you're here anyway, telling me I'm doing it wrong..." She gestured at the fence. "How would you do it right?" The boy had come to stand beside her now. The water bucket was set down. He was looking at Eli with those careful, measuring eyes. Eli looked at the fence. He looked at the woman, sweat-soaked, dirt-stained, stubborn as a mule, and twice as determined. "The post needs replacing," he said, "not repairing. If the wood's gone soft, no amount of nail pulling is going to save it." "I know that. I ordered lumber from the yard in town. It won't be here for 2 weeks. I have posts in my shed." The words came out before he could stop them. She went very still. "You're offering to sell me lumber." "I'm offering to bring lumber. You can pay me when your delivery comes in." "Why?" The question was direct. No false modesty, no dancing around it. "Because that fence line is as much mine to maintain as it is yours," he said. "Your posts go my cattle could wander through. I have an interest in the repair." She looked at him for a long moment. "That's very practical," she said. "I'm a practical man." "I can see that." She wiped her hands on her apron. "All right, Mr. Thornton, I'd be grateful for the lumber. And I'll pay you fair price." He nodded once. "I'll bring it tomorrow morning." He turned his horse to leave. "Mr. Thornton..." He stopped. "Thank you," she said. "I mean that." He didn't answer. He rode back the way he'd come, and he didn't let himself look back at the woman standing in the dirt with her 2 children beside her, and something in her eyes that he wasn't ready to name. He brought the posts the next morning. He told himself it was purely practical. The fence needed fixing. He had the materials. It was the logical thing to do. He was lying to himself, and he knew it. She was already outside when he arrived dressed for work, hair pinned back. The boy was beside her. The girl was on the porch, engaged in some elaborate game with her rag doll that involved serious negotiations about breakfast. "You came early," Rosie said. "Said I would." He unloaded the posts without ceremony. She didn't offer to help, not at first. But after he set the second one down, she came forward and picked up the other end of the third post before he could say anything. They carried it to the fence line together in silence. It was the first time in 8 years that Eli had worked alongside another person. He noticed the weight of it, the rhythm of 2 sets of footsteps moving in the same direction, the quiet efficiency of shared labor. They set the posts. He dug the holes. She mixed the water and lime for the setting. The boy Samuel stood at a careful distance and watched. After a while, Eli said without looking up, "You know anything about fence work?" "No, sir." "You want to learn?" Silence. "Then yes, sir." Eli held out the hammer. Samuel looked at it, then at his mother. She gave a small nod. The boy stepped forward and took the hammer with both hands. "Like this," Eli said. He showed him the angle, the grip, the way to let the weight of the hammer do the work instead of fighting it. Samuel's first swing hit the nail crooked. His second was better. His third drove it clean. The boy's face opened in a way Eli wasn't prepared for. It wasn't just pride. It was surprise, the surprise of a child discovering he was capable of something. Something moved in Eli's chest. He looked away before it could settle. "Good," he said. Again. They worked through the morning. Samuel learned fast, had steady hands, and paid attention, which Eli respected without saying so. The girl Lucy eventually wandered over and demanded to know why she couldn't hammer nails too. "Because you're 6, Rosie said. "I'm almost 7. "You're 6.5. "That's almost 7. "Lucy May." The girl sighed with the full dramatic weight of injustice and went back to her doll. Eli found himself almost smiling. He caught it in time, pushed it down. But it had been there, a flicker of something that felt dangerously like warmth. By noon, the fence was set. Eli loaded his tools back in the wagon. Rosie walked him to the gate, her hands still dusty from the lime. "Thank you," she said. "And I don't just mean for the posts. I know what you mean. Samuel hasn't—" She stopped, started again. "His father died 4 years ago. He hasn't had a man show him things since then." Eli said nothing. "You're good with him," she continued. "Patient. He responds to that. He's a good boy." "He is." She looked at him directly. "Mr. Thornton, can I ask you something?" He waited. "The people in town talk about you like you're something to be afraid of, like you're dangerous." She paused. "But you spent all morning teaching my son to swing a hammer, and you haven't said a cruel word to anyone. So which is it? Are you dangerous or are they wrong?" The question hit him somewhere unexpected. "Both," he said finally. "Neither. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded like she understood something he hadn't said. "Will you come back?" she asked. "To check the fence, I mean. Make sure it's setting properly." He should say no. "In a few days," he said instead. He climbed onto the wagon. He picked up the reins. "Mr. Thornton?" He looked back. She was standing in the yard with the sun behind her, her face in shadow, but he could hear the smile in her voice. "My daughter thinks you're a cowboy. She's going to be very disappointed if you don't come back." He looked at her, at the warmth in her voice, and the steadiness in her stance, and the way she was standing in her own yard, like she'd already decided she belonged there. "Can't disappoint a 6-year-old, he said. And then he turned the wagon around and drove home, and he didn't look back, but something had shifted. Something he'd locked away 8 years ago had started to rattle in its cage. He wasn't sure yet if that was a good thing or a very, very dangerous one. 3 days passed before Eli allowed himself to ride back to the Brennan property. He told himself he was checking the fence posts, making sure they'd set properly. A practical concern, nothing more. He was lying to himself again, and the worst part was, he knew it. The August heat hadn't broken. If anything, it had gotten worse, the kind of thick, wet heat that pressed against your lungs and made every breath feel earned. Eli rode slow, letting his horse pick its way along the creek bed, where the shade offered some relief. He heard them before he saw them. Lucy's voice high and bright. "But Mama, if I hold real still, maybe he'll come closer." "Lucy, that's a rattlesnake, not a kitten. Get back here this instant." Eli kicked his horse forward. He came around the bend to find Rosie standing at the edge of her property, with a shovel raised over her shoulder, her body positioned between her daughter and something coiled in the grass about 10 feet away. Samuel was frozen behind her, a bucket of water still in his hands. Eli didn't think. He slid from his horse, pulled the rifle from his saddle, and fired once. The snake's head separated from its body. The sound echoed across the flat land and faded into nothing. Nobody moved for 3 full seconds. Then Lucy said with absolute wonder, "That was amazing." Lucy Mae Brennan. Rosie's voice was shaking now, not with fear, but with the aftermath of it. The shovel was still raised. Her knuckles were white. "Get in the house. Now." "But Mama." "Now." The girl ran. Samuel followed without being told, still clutching his bucket. Rosie lowered the shovel slowly. She turned to look at Eli, and her face was doing something complicated: relief and anger, and something else all tangled together. "Thank you," she said. "You had it handled." "I had a shovel and a prayer." She pressed her hand to her chest, and he could see her fingers trembling. That thing was coiled to strike. If Lucy had taken one more step. She didn't. "Because you showed up." She looked at him. "Why did you show up?" "Checking the fence." "The fence is a 1/4 mile that way." He had no answer for that. Rosie stared at him for a long moment. Then she let out a breath that seemed to carry something heavy with it. "I need to sit down," she said. "I think my legs are about to give out." She walked to the porch steps and sat down hard. Eli stood in the yard, not sure if he was supposed to follow or leave or do something else entirely. "Well," she looked up at him. "Are you going to stand there all day, or are you going to tell me why you really came?" He walked to the porch. He didn't sit, didn't feel right somehow, but he stood at the bottom of the steps close enough to talk. "I came to check the fence," he said again. "You said that." "It's the truth. It's part of the truth." She wiped her forehead with the back of her hand. "Mr. Thornton, I've been married. I've raised 2 children, mostly on my own. I've crossed 3 states in a wagon with everything I own. I can tell when a man is lying to himself." Eli looked at her. She looked back, unflinching. "I don't know why I came," he said finally. The words felt strange in his mouth, too honest, too exposed. "I just came." Something shifted in her expression, not softening exactly, more like recognition. "That's the first true thing you've said to me since we met," she said. He didn't know how to respond to that. The screen door banged open, and Lucy burst out, apparently having decided that enough time had passed for her to rejoin the world. "Mama Samuel says the snake is dead, but I want to see it." "Absolutely not." "But, Lucy." The girl sighed with her whole body. Then her eyes found Eli, and her face lit up. "Mr. Cowboy, you came back." "His name is Mr. Thornton," Rosie said. "I know, but he looks like a cowboy." Lucy bounced down the steps and stood directly in front of Eli, looking up at him with those fearless dark eyes. "Did you really shoot that snake from all the way over there?" "Yes." "Can you teach me?" "No." "Why not?" "You're 6. I'm almost 7. She put her hands on her hips. "That's what I told Mama when I wanted to hammer nails and she still said no." "Your Mama's smart." Lucy considered this. "Are you staying for supper?" The question caught him off guard. He looked at Rosie, who seemed equally surprised. "Lucy, Mr. Thornton is a busy man. He has his own ranch too. Please?" Lucy was looking at him with an expression that was somehow both demanding and hopeful at the same time. "Mama makes really good biscuits, and gravy, and sometimes pie if we have apples." "Lucy, do you like pie, Mr. Cowboy?" Eli looked at the girl, at her mother still sitting on the porch steps with her face flushed from heat and fear and something else, at the house behind them, small and weathered but solid. He should say no. He should get on his horse and ride home and eat supper alone the way he'd eaten supper alone for 8 years, the way he was supposed to eat supper for the rest of his life. "I like pie," he heard himself say. Lucy cheered. Rosie stared at him with an expression he couldn't read. And somewhere deep in Eli's chest, the door rattled harder. The supper table was chaos. Eli hadn't sat at a table with other people in so long that he'd forgotten what it was like. The noise, the movement, the way conversations overlapped and children interrupted, and someone was always passing something to someone else. Lucy talked constantly. About the snake. About her doll. About a chicken she'd named Beatrice, who she was absolutely certain was the smartest chicken in all of Texas. Samuel was quieter, but he watched everything. He watched the way Eli held his fork, the way he cut his meat, the way he sat straight-backed, taking up exactly the space he needed, and no more. Rosie moved between the stove and the table, filling plates and refilling cups, and somehow managing to participate in 3 conversations at once. "Eat," she said to Eli, setting a plate in front of him that was piled higher than anything he'd served himself in years. "You look like you haven't had a proper meal in a month." "I eat fine." "You eat enough to survive. That's not the same thing." She sat down across from him and fixed him with a look. "When's the last time someone cooked for you?" He didn't answer. "That's what I thought." She picked up her own fork. "Eat." He ate. The food was good. Better than good. She'd made biscuits that were light and flaky gravy that had actual flavor meat that wasn't dried out or burned or any of the other things his own cooking usually managed to be. He hadn't realized how hungry he was until he started eating. "Told you," Lucy said smugly. "Mama's biscuits are the best." "Lucy, don't brag." "It's not bragging if it's true." Rosie shook her head, but there was a smile pulling at the corner of her mouth. Eli watched her without meaning to. The way she moved, efficient, confident, completely at home in her own space. The way she handled the children, firm but warm, never raising her voice even when Lucy pushed her patience. She caught him looking. He looked away. "Mr. Thornton," Samuel said. It was the first time the boy had spoken directly to him since they'd sat down. "Sam, what you did with the snake? The shot." The boy's eyes were serious. "Could you teach me to shoot like that?" The table went quiet. Rosie's fork had stopped halfway to her mouth. She was looking at her son with an expression that was half surprise, half something older and more complicated. "Samuel," she started. "Please, Mama." The boy turned to her. "I need to learn. Pa was going to teach me, but—" He stopped, swallowed. "I'm the man of this house now. I need to know how to protect us." The words hit Eli somewhere deep. He recognized them. The weight of them. The specific, terrible burden of a child who had decided that keeping his family safe was his job. He'd carried that weight himself once, before Martha, before everything. "Samuel," Rosie said quietly, "you're 10 years old. You don't need to—" "Yes, I do." The boy's voice was steady, but Eli could see his hands clenched under the table. "You can't tell me I don't, Mama. I was there when that snake, I was right there, and I couldn't do anything. I just stood there with a bucket. You stayed calm. You kept Lucy behind you. That's not nothing. It's not enough." The table was very quiet. Eli set down his fork. "Your mother's right," he said. "You're young. You've got time." Something flashed across Samuel's face. Disappointment. The beginning of anger. But, Eli continued, there's no harm in learning. Starting small, building up. Samuel looked at him. If your mother agrees, Eli said, I could show you some things. Not shooting, not yet. But how to handle a rifle, how to clean it, how to respect it. He looked at Rosie. She was staring at him with that complicated expression again, the one he couldn't quite read. Her eyes were bright, and for a moment he thought she might be angry. Then she blinked, and whatever had been there was gone. That would be kind of you, Mr. Thornton, she said quietly. If you're sure it's not too much trouble. It's not trouble. Samuel's face transformed. Not into a smile, the boy didn't seem like much of a smiler, but into something lighter, something that looked like hope. Thank you, sir, he said. Don't thank me yet. We haven't started. Lucy, apparently feeling left out, tugged on Eli's sleeve. What about me? What are you going to teach me? How to stay away from snakes. She wrinkled her nose. That's boring. Boring keeps you alive. She thought about this for a moment. Then she nodded, apparently satisfied with the logic. Rosie stood up and began clearing plates. Eli moved to help without thinking about it, an old habit from another life, from a kitchen that didn't exist anymore. And for a moment, they were standing side by side at the wash basin, close enough that he could smell the flour on her skin and the lavender in her hair. She turned her head and looked up at him. He looked down at her. Neither of them moved. Mama. Lucy's voice shattered the moment. Samuel took my doll. I did not. You did. You hit her. Rosie closed her eyes briefly. Excuse me, she said to Eli. I need to go prevent a murder. She walked away to handle her children, and Eli stood at the wash basin with a plate in his hands and a feeling in his chest that he didn't know what to do with. He should leave. He should get on his horse and ride home and not come back. Instead, he finished the dishes. He came back 3 days later. Then 2 days after that. Then every other day. Each time he had a reason. The fence needed checking. The creek level was low. She should know about it. He'd brought some extra lumber, thought she might need it for the barn. Each time she smiled that half smile and said, Of course, Mr. Thornton, very practical. Each time she invited him to stay for coffee, then for lunch, then for supper again. Each time he said yes. The townspeople noticed. Eli knew they noticed because he started seeing things he hadn't seen in years. Looks exchanged when he rode through town. Whispers that stopped when he walked into the general store. The particular way people straightened up and paid attention when his name was mentioned. Heard you've been spending time at the Brennan place, Hank said one morning, not quite looking at him as he counted out change. Fence work. Every other day. Eli took his change without answering. She seems nice. Hank continued. The widow. Her children are well behaved. Lucy's a handful, but... Anything else you need to say? Hank looked at him then. Something in his face that wasn't quite judgment, but wasn't quite approval either. Martha's been gone 8 years, Eli. Eli's hand stopped halfway to his pocket. I'm not saying you have to forget her. Hank continued quietly. I'm just saying, there's a difference between honoring the dead and burying yourself with them. Eli looked at him for a long moment. Then he picked up his supplies and walked out without a word. But the words followed him all the way home. That night he didn't sleep. He lay on his bed and stared at the ceiling and listened to the silence of his empty house. The silence he'd built. The silence he'd chosen. Martha had been dead 8 years. His daughter Rose, named for the flowers Martha loved, had been dead 8 years. 8 years of eating alone, sleeping alone, waking up alone. 8 years of building walls so high and so thick that nobody could get through them. Nobody would even try. And then Rosemary Brennan had stepped off a wagon with her 2 children and her stubborn chin and her soft round face, and she'd looked at him like she was still deciding. and something had started to crack. He pressed his palm against the small wooden box on his nightstand. Inside were three things: a lock of Martha's hair, a tiny bouquet that had belonged to Rose, and a photograph faded now of a family that didn't exist anymore. "What do I do?" he whispered into the darkness. Martha didn't answer. She never did. The next morning, Eli rode to the Brennan property before dawn. He hadn't planned to. His body just seemed to know where it wanted to go, and he'd stopped fighting it somewhere around the 3rd mile. He found Rosie already awake, standing by the well pump, with her hands on her hips and frustration all over her face. "It's broken," she said without greeting when she saw him. "The pump." "No, my sunny disposition." She kicked the pump's base lightly. "Yes, the pump. It stopped working yesterday. I've been hauling water from the creek since then." Eli dismounted. "Let me look." He crouched down and pulled off the pump casing, examining the mechanism inside. The valve seal had deteriorated. Simple fix if you had the right parts. "I can fix this," he said. "Need to ride back for supplies. Couple hours." "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to." He stood up. "I'm going to anyway." She looked at him, really looked at him the way she had that first day in the general store. "Why?" she asked. "Why what? Why do you keep coming here? Why do you keep helping?" She crossed her arms over her chest. "I've been trying to figure you out, Mr. Thornton. The town says you're a recluse, a stone man. Someone who doesn't talk to anybody, doesn't help anybody, doesn't let anybody in." She took a step closer. "But you spent all morning 3 days ago teaching my son how to hold a rifle properly. You fixed my fence. You shot a snake that was about to bite my daughter, and now you're offering to ride 2 hours round trip to fix my pump." Another step. "So which is it? Are you the man they say you are, or are you someone else?" Eli stood very still. "Both," he said, the same answer he'd given before. "Neither." "That's not good enough anymore." Her voice was quiet but firm. She was standing close enough now that he could see the small lines at the corners of her eyes, the gray strands mixed into her auburn hair, the way her chin jutted forward slightly when she was determined about something. "I'm not asking you to explain your whole life," she said. "I'm just asking for the truth. Why are you here?" Eli looked at her. He thought about 8 years of silence, 8 years of building walls, 8 years of eating alone and sleeping alone and telling himself that was enough. "Because you don't flinch," he said. She blinked. "What?" "Everyone in that town. They look at me and they see something broken, something cold. They flinch away from it." He paused. "You don't. You look at me like you're still deciding what you see. And that matters to you." "I don't know." The words came out rough, almost angry. "I don't know what matters anymore. I don't know why I keep coming here, or why I can't stay away, or why I'm standing in your yard at dawn talking about things I haven't talked about in 8 years. His voice cracked on the last word. He stopped, turned away, pressed his hand against his chest where something was breaking loose that he'd kept locked down for almost a decade. "I should go," he said. "I'll send someone with the pump parts. You don't need me to—" Elijah. His whole name. Not Mr. Thornton, not Eli. Elijah. He stopped. "My husband died 4 years ago," she said quietly. "Fell off a horse, broke his neck. It was fast. They told me he didn't suffer, but I don't know if that's true, or if they just say that to make widows feel better. He didn't turn around. I spent the first year waiting to die too," she continued. "Not actively, I had children to care for, but some part of me was just waiting. Like if I held still enough, death would come find me, and I could stop hurting." He could hear her footsteps behind him, coming closer. "The second year I got angry, at Henry for leaving me, at God for taking him, at myself for still being here when I didn't want to be." Closer still. The third year I started moving again. Sold the farm in Missouri. Bought a wagon. Brought my children west. Because I realized something. She was right behind him now. He could feel her presence like heat. I realized that grief doesn't end, she said. It doesn't go away. You don't wake up one day and suddenly feel better. But you can choose to keep living anyway. You can choose to let other people in, even though it terrifies you. Even though you know you might lose them too. Eli turned around. She was standing there with her face upturned, looking at him with eyes that held no pity, no fear, no judgment. Just understanding. The kind of understanding that only comes from having walked through the same fire. I'm not asking you to stop grieving, she said. I'm just asking if there's room for something else alongside it. He looked at her for a long time. He thought about Martha, about Rose, about the wooden box on his nightstand, and the grave he visited every year on the anniversary of their deaths. He thought about sitting at Rosie's table with Lucy, chattering, and Samuel watching, and food that actually tasted like someone had cared about making it. He thought about the way Rosie moved in her own kitchen, the way she laughed at her daughter's endless questions, the way she looked at him like she was still deciding. I don't know how to do this, he said. I don't know how to be whatever it is you're asking me to be. I'm not asking you to be anything. She reached out and put her hand on his arm. Just that. Just her hand on his arm, warm and solid and real. I'm just asking you to stay for breakfast. Something broke open in his chest, not all at once, not dramatically, just a crack, a small one, letting in air that had been locked out for 8 years. Okay, he said. She smiled, not the half-smile she'd been giving him, a real one, full and warm. Come inside, she said. I'll make coffee. He followed her up the porch steps and through the door into the kitchen, where the children were just waking up, and Lucy saw him and shrieked, Mr. Cowboy's back! And Samuel looked at him with something that might have been approval, and Rosie handed him a cup of coffee that was strong enough to strip paint. And for the first time in 8 years, Eli Thornton ate breakfast with people who were glad he was there. The trouble started 2 weeks later on a Wednesday morning that felt like every other Wednesday morning until it didn't. Eli was at Hank's store picking up supplies when the door swung open and a man walked in that he'd never seen before. City clothes, polished boots, the kind of smile that didn't reach the eyes. Morning, the man said to Hank. I'm looking for information about a property, the old Hendricks place out by the creek. Eli's hand stopped halfway to the salt barrel. That property's been sold, Hank said carefully. Widow moved in about 6 weeks ago. So I heard. The man leaned against the counter like he owned it. Rosemary Brennan, correct. Came from Missouri with 2 children. That's right. Interesting. The man pulled out a piece of paper from his coat pocket. See, I've got documentation here that says the Hendricks estate was never properly settled. Seems old man Hendricks owed money to some people back east. People who've transferred their claim to me. Hank's face went pale. Eli turned around slowly. Who are you? He asked. The man looked at him, took in the worn clothes, the calloused hands, the way Eli was standing, like a man who'd been in fights before and wasn't afraid of another one. Chester Hale, he said. I'm a businessman, land acquisition mostly. And you are Elijah Thornton. Something flickered in Hale's eyes. Recognition, maybe. Or calculation. The Stone Man, he said. I've heard about you. They say you haven't spoken more than 10 words to anyone in this town for nearly a decade. They say a lot of things. They also say you've been spending time at the Brennan property. Hale smiled that empty smile again. Interesting choice, Mr. Thornton. A fat widow with 2 children and a disputed deed. Not exactly prime companionship. Eli's whole body went still. What did you say? I said. I heard what you said. Eli took 1 step forward. Just 1. But something in the way he moved made Hale take a step back. You're going to want to choose your next words very carefully. Hale's smile faltered. Then it came back harder now. "I'm just stating facts, Mr. Thornton. The woman bought land that wasn't properly for sale. I have legal documentation. I have lawyers. I have every intention of claiming what's rightfully mine." "The Hendricks property was sold through the county recorder's office," Hank said. "I saw the paperwork myself. Everything was legal." Legal according to a county clerk who didn't do his due diligence. Hale tucked the paper back in his pocket. "I'll be filing a formal challenge by end of week. The widow will receive notification. And if she's smart, she'll pack up her children and go back where she came from before this gets expensive." He tipped his hat, a mockery of manners, and walked out. Eli stood in the middle of the store, his hands clenched at his sides, his heart pounding with a fury he hadn't felt in years. A fat widow. He'd called her a fat widow, like that was all she was. Like the shape of her body somehow made her less valuable, less worthy of respect, less human. "Eli." Hank's voice was quiet. "Eli, you need to warn her." "I know. That man means business. I've seen his type before. They don't stop until they get what they want." "I know." Eli grabbed his supplies without counting his change. He was on his horse and riding hard toward the Brennan property before the dust from Hale's departure had settled. Rosie was in the yard when he arrived, hanging laundry on a line. She turned when she heard him coming, and her face shifted from welcome to concern in the space of a heartbeat. "What happened? Where are the children?" "Inside. Samuel's reading to Lucy." "Eli, what?" "Good. Keep them there." He dismounted and walked toward her. "We need to talk." He told her everything. About Chester Hale, about the claim, about the lawyers, and the challenge, and the words that still burned in his throat like acid. He didn't tell her what Hale had called her. She didn't need to hear that. When he finished, Rosie was silent for a long moment. Her face had gone pale under the flush of the heat, and her hands were gripping the edge of a wet sheet so hard her knuckles had turned white. "The deed is valid," she said finally. I checked 3 times before I bought this property." "I know." "I have paperwork. I have the county recorder's stamp. I know." He reached out and took her hands, peeling them gently away from the sheet. "I know you did everything right. This isn't about what you did. This is about a man who wants something and doesn't care who he hurts to get it." She looked at him with eyes that were bright with fear and anger and something else, something that looked like it might break if she let it. "I can't lose this land, Eli. I can't. I have nothing else. No money saved. No family to go back to. If I lose this property, Her voice cracked. "My children." "You're not going to lose anything." "You don't know that." "I know I'm not going to let it happen." She stared at him. "Why?" she whispered. "Why do you care so much?" He looked at her, at this woman who had crossed 3 states with 2 children and a wagon, who had bought a piece of land and worked it with her bare hands, who laughed at her daughter's jokes and worried about her son, and looked at him the man the whole town had given up on, like she saw something worth saving. "Because you don't deserve this," he said. "Because your children don't deserve this. Because—" He stopped. Because what? He couldn't say it. Not yet. Maybe not ever. "Because I made a choice," he said instead. 6 weeks ago, I rode to your property to check a fence. I could have turned around. I could have stayed away. But I didn't. I kept coming back. And somewhere along the way, I stopped being able to imagine not coming back." She was looking at him with that expression again, the one that made him feel like he was standing on the edge of something vast and terrifying. "Eli! Mama!" The screen door banged open. Samuel came running out, his face white. "Mama, there's a man coming up the road. He's got papers in his hand." Chester Hale rode into the yard 5 minutes later, flanked by 2 men who looked like they'd been hired for their size rather than their brains. Rosie stood on the porch with her children behind her. Eli stood at the bottom of the steps between her and the men. "Mrs. Brennan," Hale said, not bothering to dismount. I believe we have business to discuss. I don't know who you are, sir, but you're on my property uninvited. That's precisely the matter we need to address. He held up the papers. I have documentation here proving that the estate of Harold Hendricks was encumbered by debts at the time of his death. Debts which were never settled before the property was sold. Debts which have now been legally transferred to me. My deed is valid. Your deed is based on a sale that should never have happened. Hale smiled that cold smile. I'm not an unreasonable man, Mrs. Brennan. I'm prepared to offer you fair compensation for your trouble. Enough to transport yourself and your children back to Missouri. Enough to start over somewhere more appropriate. I'm not going anywhere. Mrs. Brennan, I said no. Hale's smile thinned. You're making a mistake. The only mistake I see, Rosie said, her voice steady, despite the fear Eli could see in her eyes, is a man who thinks he can ride onto a woman's property and threaten her into giving up her home. I'm not threatening anyone. I'm simply explaining the legal reality of your situation. Then explain it to a judge. Rosie's chin came up. File your challenge. Bring your lawyers. I'll bring mine. You have lawyers, Mrs. Brennan. On a widow's income. She has me, Eli said. Hale's eyes shifted to him. Something ugly moved behind them. Ah, yes. Mr. Thornton, the silent cowboy who suddenly found his voice. He leaned forward in his saddle. Tell me what exactly is your interest in this matter. The woman isn't your wife. The children aren't yours. The property doesn't border your land. It does, actually. Barely. A quarter-mile of creek bed. Hale's lip curled. Hardly worth the trouble you're inviting. That's for me to decide. Is it? Hale looked at Rosie, then back at Eli. I wonder what the good people of Cooperton will think when they hear about this arrangement. A widow, a recluse, 2 children in the house. It's all very unconventional. Eli's hand moved toward his belt. Eli. Rosie's voice cut through the red haze that was closing in on his vision. Don't. He stopped. His fingers were trembling. Smart woman, Hale said. Violence won't help your case, Mr. Thornton. It'll only make mine stronger. He tucked the papers back into his coat. I'll be filing my challenge with the county recorder by end of week. You'll receive formal notification within 10 days. I suggest you use that time to reconsider your options. He turned his horse and rode away. His 2 men followed. The yard was silent. Then Lucy's small voice came from behind the screen door. Mama, who was that bad man? Rosie let out a breath that sounded like it had been holding back a dam. Nobody, sweetheart. Just someone who got lost. He didn't look lost. He looked mean. Eli turned and looked at the little girl peering through the screen. Her face was solemn. Her eyes were too old for her age. He was mean, Eli said quietly. But mean men don't always win. Do good men win? He looked at Rosie. At the fear she was trying to hide. At the determination underneath it. Sometimes, he said, when they fight hard enough. That night, after the children were asleep, Eli and Rosie sat on the porch in the cooling darkness and talked about what came next. I need a lawyer, Rosie said. A real one, someone who knows land law. I know a man in Austin, Francis Cole. He's expensive, but he's good. I can't afford expensive. I can. She turned to look at him. Eli, I can't let you. You're not letting me do anything. I'm choosing to. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. That land is worth something, Rosie. The water rights alone make it valuable. If Hale gets his hands on it, he'll flip it for 10 times what he's pretending to pay you. This isn't charity. It's an investment. An investment in what? He was quiet for a long moment. In something that matters, he said finally. I haven't had that in a long time. She reached over and took his hand. Her fingers were rough from work, warm from the summer heat. You keep doing that. she said quietly. Saying things that crack me open. I don't mean to. Yes, you do. She squeezed his hand. And I'm starting to think I don't mind. The next morning, Eli rode to town and sent a telegram to Francis Cole in Austin. By evening, he had a response Cole would arrive within the week. He also did something else, something that surprised even him. He talked to people. Old Hank at the general store, Sheriff Tom Reeves, the blacksmith George Miller, who Samuel had been apprenticing with, the women who gathered at the church on Wednesday afternoons. He talked to them about Rosie Brennan, about her valid deed, about Chester Hale and his fraudulent claim, about what it meant when a man could ride into a town and try to steal a widow's land through paperwork and intimidation. He talked more in 3 days than he'd talked in 3 years, and people listened. That Hale fellow came to me too, George Miller said, his face grim. Wanted to know about the Brennan property. Asked questions about the widow, what she looked like, how she seemed, whether she had anyone looking after her. He spat on the ground. I didn't like the way he said it. None of us did, Hank added. He's been all over town spreading stories. Says the widow bought stolen property. Says anyone who helps her is helping a thief. And what do people say back? Hank looked at him with something that might have been respect. They say Elijah Thornton vouches for her. And if the stone man speaks up after 8 years of silence, maybe that means something. Eli nodded slowly. Spread the word. Anyone Hale talks to, I want to know about it. Anyone he threatens, I want to know about that too. You're building an army, Hank said. I'm building a wall, same as I've always done. Eli put his hat back on. Only this time I'm putting someone on the inside of it. The week before Cole arrived was the longest of Eli's life. Hale didn't come back to the Brennan property, but his presence hung over everything like a storm cloud. Rosie jumped at every sound. Samuel had started sleeping with a knife under his pillow. Eli found out when the boy asked him to sharpen it. You shouldn't need that, Eli told him. But I might. No. Eli crouched down to the boy's level. Listen to me, Samuel. Protecting your family is important. But there's a difference between being prepared and being afraid. Fear makes you do stupid things. Preparation makes you do smart ones. I don't understand. A knife under your pillow means you're scared of what might come through the door. A man who knows how to shoot, who knows the land, who knows his neighbors, that man doesn't need a knife under his pillow. He's already ready. Samuel looked at him for a long moment. Will you teach me? He asked. Everything. Not just the rifle, but all of it. Eli saw something in the boy's eyes that he recognized. The desperate need to be capable, to be enough, to not be helpless when the bad thing came. Yes, he said. I'll teach you everything. Cole arrived on a Tuesday, a small, sharp-eyed man with spectacles and a leather satchel full of documents. He spent 2 days reviewing Rosie's paperwork. 2 days asking questions about Hendricks, about the sale, about every detail of the transaction. On the 3rd day, he called Eli and Rosie into the kitchen and spread his findings on the table. The deed is valid, he said. Absolutely, unquestionably valid. Hale's claim is fraudulent. Rosie let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh. However, Cole continued, that doesn't mean he can't cause trouble. He's already filed with the county recorder. There will be a hearing. The judge will need to rule on the validity of his claim. How long? Eli asked. 3 weeks, maybe 4. And in the meantime, Hale can't touch the property, but he can make Mrs. Brennan's life very difficult. Cole looked at Rosie over his spectacles. Has he threatened you directly? He called me. She stopped, swallowed. He implied things about my character, about Mr. Thornton's involvement. What things? He said people would talk about a widow and a recluse and children in the house. Her voice was steady, but Eli could see her hands shaking under the table. He said it was unconventional. Cole's face hardened. That's a familiar tactic. Attack the woman's reputation when you can't attack her paperwork. He began gathering his documents. We'll need witnesses. People who can speak to Mrs. Brennan's character. People who can describe Hale's behavior. I have names, Eli said. Good. Get me sworn statements, as many as you can. Cole stood up. I'll be in town until the hearing. Contact me if anything changes. After he left, Rosie sat at the kitchen table and put her face in her hands. Eli sat down across from her and waited. I thought it was over, she said, her voice muffled. When he said the deed was valid, I thought it was over. It will be, after the hearing. 3 weeks. She lifted her head. Her eyes were red. 3 weeks of this man spreading lies about me, about us. 3 weeks of my children hearing whispers. They won't hear anything. I won't let them. You can't control what people say, Eli. No. He reached across the table and took her hand. But I can control what I do about it. She looked at their joined hands, then up at his face. Why are you doing this? She whispered. The real reason. Not the property line, not the investment. The real reason. Eli was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Because 8 years ago, I lost everything that mattered, and I told myself I'd never let anything matter again. I told myself it was safer that way. Easier. He squeezed her hand. But then you showed up with your broken wagon and your stubborn chin and your daughter who calls me Mr. Cowboy. And somewhere between fixing your fence and fixing your pump and eating at your table, I started to remember what it felt like to have something worth protecting. Rosie's eyes were bright with tears. You matter, Rosie, he said. Your children matter. This land matters, and I am not going to let Chester Hale take any of it. She stood up from the table. She walked around to his side. And for the first time since Martha died, Eli let another woman put her arms around him. He didn't pull away. He didn't freeze. He just held on and let himself be held and felt something that had been broken for 8 years begin slowly, painfully, miraculously to heal. The night before the hearing, Chester Hale made his final move. Eli was riding back from town when he saw the smoke, not the thin gray spiral of a cooking fire. This was black, thick, rising from the direction of the Brennan property like a warning written in the sky. He kicked his horse into a gallop. By the time he reached the farm, Rosie was already in the yard, with a bucket in each hand, Samuel beside her doing the same. The barn was burning, not fully engulfed, but the east wall was consumed with flames that were climbing fast. The horses! Rosie shouted when she saw him. They're still inside. Eli didn't think. He ran for the barn door, kicked it open, and plunged into the smoke. He couldn't see, could barely breathe. He heard the animals screaming that terrible sound horses make when they're terrified, and he followed it blindly, feeling along the stall walls until his hands found a bridle. He pulled. The horse fought him, too panicked to understand that he was trying to save it, and Eli's shoulder slammed against wood as the animal reared. Easy, he choked out. Easy, come on, come on. He got the first horse out, went back for the second. By the time he emerged with the mare, his lungs were burning, and his eyes were streaming, and Rosie was screaming his name. Eli, Eli, the wall's coming down. He dove clear, just as the east section collapsed in a shower of sparks and burning timber. They fought the fire for 2 hours. By the end, the barn was half gone, but the house was saved. The horses were saved. The children who had watched from the porch with wide, terrified eyes were saved. But Eli knew it hadn't been an accident. Who did this? Samuel's voice was shaking with rage. Who did this to us? You know who? Eli said quietly. Rosie was standing in the yard, covered in soot. Her dress ruined her face, streaked with ash and tears. She was looking at what remained of her barn with an expression that broke something in Eli's chest. He's trying to scare me off, she said. Before the hearing, he wants me to run. Are you going to? She turned to look at him. Her eyes were red from smoke and crying, but underneath all of that was something hard, something unbreakable. "No," she said. "I am not going to run." "Mama." Lucy's small voice came from the porch. "Mama, I'm scared." Rosie walked to her daughter and picked her up, held her close despite the soot and the ash and the smell of smoke that clung to both of them. "I know, baby," she said. "I'm scared too, but being scared doesn't mean we stop fighting. What if the bad man comes back? Then we'll be ready for him." Eli watched them, the mother and daughter holding each other in the ruined yard, and he felt something shift in his chest. Something that had been uncertain for weeks suddenly became clear as glass. He knew what he had to do. "Stay here," he said. "Lock the doors. Don't let anyone in until I come back." "Where are you going?" "To make sure this never happens again." He found Chester Hale at the Cooperton Inn sitting in the dining room with a glass of whiskey and a satisfied expression on his face. When Eli walked in, Hale looked up with the lazy confidence of a man who believed he had already won. "Mr. Thornton," he said, "late for a social call." "This isn't social." "No." Hale took a sip of his whiskey. "Then what is it?" Eli pulled up a chair and sat down across from him, close enough that Hale couldn't pretend he wasn't listening. "I know you set that fire." "That's a serious accusation." "It's the truth." Hale smiled. "Prove it." "I don't need to prove it." "Not to you." Eli leaned forward. "But I want you to understand something, Hale. Understand it very clearly." "And what's that?" "Tomorrow you're going to walk into that hearing. You're going to present your fraudulent claim, and you're going to lose." Hale's smile flickered. "You're going to lose," Eli continued, "because I've spent the last 3 weeks collecting statements from every person in this town who's watched you operate. I've got testimony from the county recorder about the validity of Mrs. Brennan's deed. I've got a lawyer from Austin who specializes in exposing men like you. And I've got a judge who doesn't take kindly to arson. There's no proof of arson. There's a barn that burned down 12 hours before a hearing that would have ruled against you. That's not coincidence. That's desperation." Eli held Hale's gaze. "And desperate men make mistakes." Something shifted in Hale's expression. The confidence was still there, but underneath it now was something else. Something that looked like the first flicker of fear. "You're bluffing," Hale said. "Am I?" Eli stood up. "Tomorrow at 9 o'clock. I'll see you there." He walked out of the inn and into the night, and he didn't look back. The hearing was held in the town hall, a building that had never seen this many people in its entire existence. Word had spread about the fire, about the accusation, about the stone man who had come out of 8 years of silence to defend a widow and her children. They came from all over the county. Ranchers Eli had never spoken to, women from the church, old Hank from the general store, Sheriff Tom Reeves, George Miller from the blacksmith. Even people Eli didn't recognize, people who had just heard the story and wanted to see how it ended. Rosie sat at the front of the room, dressed in her best clothes, the same dress she'd worn the day she'd arrived in Cooperton, cleaned and pressed, and somehow still dignified despite everything. Samuel sat beside her. Lucy was on her other side holding her hand. Eli sat behind them close enough to touch if she needed him. Judge Warren Prescott called the hearing to order at 9 o'clock sharp. This hearing is to determine the validity of a claim filed by Mr. Chester Hale against the estate of Harold Hendricks, currently held by Mrs. Rosemary Brennan, Prescott said. "Mr. Hale, you may present your case." Hale stood up with that confident smile still plastered on his face, but Eli noticed something different about him today. A tightness around the eyes, a slight tremor in his hands. He was scared. "Good." "Your Honor," Hale began, "I have documentation proving that Mr. Harold Hendricks owed a substantial debt to the firm of Morrison and Associates at the time of his death. This debt was never settled before the property was sold. Under Texas law, that debt transfers to the new owner. Objection. Francis Cole rose from his seat. The document Mr. Hale is referring to is a forgery. The room went silent. That's a serious accusation, Mr. Cole, Judge Prescott said. It is, Your Honor, and I can prove it. Cole held up a piece of paper. This is a letter from the actual Morrison and Associates firm in Boston. They confirm that Harold Hendricks had no outstanding debts with their company at the time of his death. They also confirm that they have never transferred any claims to Chester Hale or anyone else. Hale's face went white. Your Honor, this is... Furthermore, Cole continued, I have a sworn statement from the county recorder confirming that Mrs. Brennan's deed was properly executed and registered. The sale was legal. The property belongs to her. Mr. Hale's claim is not only invalid, it's fraudulent. The murmuring in the crowd grew louder. Order, Prescott said, banging his gavel. Mr. Hale, do you have a response? Hale opened his mouth, closed it. For the first time since Eli had met him, he had nothing to say. Your Honor, if I may. Sheriff Tom Reeves stood up from the back of the room. I have some additional information that the court should consider. Go ahead, Sheriff. Last night there was a fire at the Brennan property. The barn was destroyed. Mrs. Brennan and her children could have been killed. Reeves looked directly at Hale. I've spoken to witnesses who saw a man matching Mr. Hale's description riding away from the property approximately 1 hour before the fire was discovered. The room erupted. That's a lie, Hale shouted. I was at the inn all night. I have witnesses. Your witnesses are the 2 men you've been paying to intimidate Mrs. Brennan, Reeves said calmly. I've got statements from both of them. They flipped on you this morning, Hale. Turns out they didn't want to hang for arson. Hale's face went from white to gray. Your Honor, Cole said, given the evidence of fraud and the ongoing investigation into arson, I move that Mr. Hale's claim be dismissed with prejudice and that he be held for criminal charges. Prescott looked at Hale for a long moment. Then he banged his gavel. Motion granted. Mr. Hale, you are hereby ordered into custody pending investigation. Mrs. Brennan, your deed is valid. The property is yours. The room exploded into cheers. Eli watched as 2 deputies moved forward to take Hale into custody. Watched as the man who had threatened Rosie burned her barn, tried to destroy everything she'd built, was led away in handcuffs. He felt Rosie's hand on his arm. It's over, she said, her voice trembling. It's really over. It's over. She turned to face him fully. Her eyes were bright with tears, but she was smiling. Really smiling, for the first time in weeks. Thank you, she said, for everything. For believing in me when I wasn't sure I believed in myself. You never needed me to believe in you. You had that covered all on your own. Maybe. She reached up and touched his face. But it helped knowing you were there. Around them people were celebrating. Old Hank was shaking hands. Sheriff Reeves was fielding questions. Lucy had somehow acquired a piece of candy and was sharing it with Samuel, who was pretending he was too old for candy, but eating it anyway. But in that moment, Eli only saw Rosie. I have something to ask you, he said. What? He took her hands in his, right there in front of the whole town, in front of everyone who had watched him disappear into silence for 8 years and had probably assumed he'd stay there forever. I'm not good with words, he said. Never have been. But I need you to know something. What do you need me to know? That night after the fire when I went to confront Hale, I wasn't just angry. I was terrified. More terrified than I've been since Martha died. He paused. Because for the first time in 8 years, I had something to lose again. Rosie's grip on his hands tightened. I don't want to go back to my empty house, he said. I don't want to eat alone, sleep alone, wake up alone. I've done that for 8 years, and I thought it was enough, but it wasn't. It was just surviving. He looked at her, really looked at her with everything he had. I want to live again, Rosie, and I want to do it with you. The tears spilled over now. She was crying and smiling at the same time, and it was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. "Are you asking me to marry you, Elijah Thornton?" "I'm asking you to let me stay, to let me be there for you and your children, to let me—" He stopped, tried again. "Yes, I'm asking you to marry me, if you'll have me. If I'll have you." She laughed a wet, broken, joyful sound. "Eli, I've been waiting for you to ask since the first time you sat at my table." "Is that a yes?" "That's a yes." He pulled her into his arms and held her right there in the middle of the town hall, with half of Cooperton watching and cheering and probably gossiping already. He didn't care. For the first time in 8 years, Elijah Thornton didn't care who was watching. Lucy's voice cut through the celebration. "Does this mean Mr. Cowboy is going to be our new papa?" Eli pulled back from Rosie and looked down at the little girl who was staring up at him with those fearless brown eyes. "Would that be okay with you?" he asked. She thought about it for exactly 2 seconds. "Yes," she said decisively. "But you have to let me name your horse something better than General." "We'll discuss it. His name should be Captain Thunderbolt." "We'll discuss it." Samuel stepped forward. His face was more guarded than his sister's, still measuring, still deciding. But there was something different in his eyes now. Something that looked almost like hope. "Mr. Thornton," he said, "are you going to teach me everything, like you promised?" Eli looked at the boy who had been carrying his family on his shoulders since he was 6 years old. The boy who slept with a knife under his pillow because he was afraid of not being able to protect the people he loved. "Everything," Eli said. "I promise." Samuel nodded slowly. Then he stuck out his hand. Eli shook it, man to man. And something that had been holding its breath in the boy's face finally let go. That afternoon, after the celebration had died down and the crowd had dispersed, Eli walked with Rosie back to her property. The barn was still half destroyed, the smell of smoke still hung in the air, but somehow none of that seemed to matter anymore. "We'll rebuild it," Eli said. "Bigger than before, strong enough to last." "With what money?" "I have some saved, and the town will help. You saw how many people showed up today." Rosie looked at the ruined barn, then at the house, then at her children playing in the yard. Lucy was trying to teach Samuel some kind of dance, and he was tolerating it with the long-suffering patience of an older brother who secretly didn't mind. "When I left Missouri," she said quietly, "I told myself I was going to build something new, something that was mine. I told myself I didn't need anyone's help. What do you think now?" She turned to face him. "I think I was wrong," she said. "I think needing people isn't weakness. I think letting them in is the bravest thing you can do." He pulled her close. "I spent 8 years building walls," he said. "I thought I was protecting myself, but all I was doing was making sure I died alone. And now—" He looked at the children, at the ruined barn that they would rebuild together, at the woman in his arms who had refused to give up, refused to run, refused to let him stay hidden. "Now I've got something worth living for," he said. She smiled up at him, that full, real smile that made something in his chest ache in the best possible way. "So do I," she said. And then she kissed him. It was the first kiss Eli had shared with anyone since Martha. The first time in 8 years he'd let someone that close. It didn't feel like betrayal. It felt like coming home. When they finally pulled apart, Lucy was standing right next to them, staring with intense fascination. "Are you going to do that a lot now?" she asked. "Probably," Eli said. "Okay." She considered this. "Can I have another piece of candy?" "Ask your mother." "Mama, can I?" "1 piece, and then we're eating supper." Lucy ran off to find her candy, and Samuel wandered over with his hands in his pockets. "Mr. Thornton." "You can call me Eli Samuel, if you want." The boy thought about it. "Maybe after the wedding," he said. It seems more proper. Eli nodded. He understood. Some things needed to be earned. Can I ask you something? Samuel said. Anything. The man who burned our barn, he called Mama. The boy stopped. His jaw tightened. He said things about her, about how she looks. I heard him when he came to the house that day. Eli's whole body went still. What did he say? He called her a fat widow. Like that meant she didn't deserve to be treated right. Samuel's hands were clenched at his sides. I wanted to hit him. I wanted to make him take it back. Why didn't you? Because Mama needed me to stay calm, and because hitting him wouldn't change anything. The boy looked up at Eli. But I need to know. Is that what you think too? That she doesn't? No. Eli cut him off. Not even for a second. Then what do you think? Eli crouched down to the boy's level. He looked him in the eyes, man to man, the way Samuel deserved. I think your mother is the strongest person I've ever met, he said. I think she crossed 3 states with 2 children, and a wagon bought a piece of land and fought off a man who tried to take it from her. I think she raised a son who would stand in front of a fire to protect his family. I think she's brave and stubborn and smart and beautiful. Beautiful. Yes. Eli didn't waver. Beautiful. In every way that matters. Samuel stared at him for a long moment. Then something in his face changed. The suspicion faded. The measuring look disappeared. What was left was something simpler. Something that looked like trust. Okay, he said quietly. Okay. He walked away, and Eli watched him go, and he thought about all the ways men failed the children who were watching them. He wasn't going to be one of those men. Not anymore. That night Eli sat on Rosie's porch for the last time as a visitor. Tomorrow, they would start rebuilding the barn. Next week, they would talk to the preacher about a wedding. Next month, he would move his things from his empty house to this one that was full of noise and laughter and children who called him Mr. Cowboy. But tonight, he just sat. Rosie came out and sat beside him close enough that their shoulders touched. What are you thinking about? She asked. Martha. She went very still. Tell me about her, she said quietly. So he did. He told her about how they'd met at a barn dance when he was 22, and she was 20, and neither of them knew how to dance properly. He told her about their wedding, small and simple and perfect. He told her about the ranch they'd built together, board by board, nail by nail. He told her about Rose, their daughter. 3 years old when the fever took both of them in the same terrible week. I buried them next to each other, he said. Martha would have wanted that. She never could stand to be apart from Rose, not even for an hour. Rosie took his hand. I'm not trying to replace her, she said. I want you to know that. I'm not asking you to stop loving her. I know. I just want there to be room for me, too. He turned to face her. In the fading light, her face was soft open. Everything he'd been afraid to want for 8 years. There's room, he said. There's room for everything. She leaned her head against his shoulder, and they sat there together as the stars came out, and for the first time in as long as he could remember, the silence didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like peace. The wedding was held on the first Sunday of September, in the yard, where the barn had burned and been rebuilt. The whole town came. People Eli hadn't spoken to in years. People he barely recognized. People who had watched him disappear into silence, and had apparently been waiting all this time for him to come back. Old Hank stood at the front with his Bible, because the regular preacher was down with a summer cold, and Hank had married people before in his younger days. Rosie wore a dress that Mrs. Miller from the dress shop had made for her, white cotton, with blue ribbons at the waist, simple and practical, and somehow exactly right. Lucy was the flower girl. She took the job very seriously, scattering petals with the focused intensity of a surgeon performing an operation. Samuel stood beside Eli as his best man, The boy had grown 3 inches since June, it seemed, and he held himself differently now. Less like a child carrying a weight too heavy for his shoulders. More like a young man learning to share the load. "You nervous?" Samuel asked quietly just before the ceremony began. "Terrified," Eli admitted. "Me too." Eli looked at him. "Why are you terrified?" "Because after today you're going to be my—" Samuel stopped, swallowed. "You're going to be my pa, officially. And I've never had that before. Not since mine died." Something cracked open in Eli's chest. "Samuel," he said, "I'm not trying to replace your father. I know. But I am going to be here, every day, for as long as I live." Eli put his hand on the boy's shoulder. "That's what family means. You don't get to disappear." Samuel looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded, and his eyes were bright, and he turned to face the front as Rosie began walking toward them. Eli watched her come. She was walking slowly, holding a small bouquet of wildflowers that Lucy had picked that morning. Her face was calm, but he could see her hands shaking slightly around the stems. She was afraid too. Good. That made 2 of them. When she reached him, she handed the flowers to Lucy and took his hands in hers. "Last chance to run," she whispered. "I'm done running." "So am I." Old Hank cleared his throat. "Dearly beloved," he began, "we are gathered here today to witness the union of Elijah Thornton and Rosemary Brennan. A union that if you'd asked me 6 months ago, I would have said was impossible." Quiet laughter from the crowd. "Eli Thornton was the most stubborn, silent, closed-off man in this county," Hank continued. "And Rosemary Brennan was a widow with 2 children, and more courage than sense, who looked at that stubborn man and decided he was worth fighting for. He looked at both of them. That's what love is, I think. Deciding someone is worth fighting for, worth staying for, worth opening your heart for, even when it scares you half to death." Eli felt Rosie's grip tighten on his hands. "Do you, Elijah, take this woman to be your wife, to have and to hold in sickness and in health, for as long as you both shall live?" "I do." "And do you, Rosemary, take this man to be your husband, to have and to hold in sickness and in health, for as long as you both shall live?" "I do." "Then by the power vested in me by the state of Texas and the good Lord above, I pronounce you husband and wife." Hank smiled. "You may kiss your bride." Eli pulled Rosie into his arms and kissed her, and the crowd cheered, and somewhere in the middle of it all, Lucy announced loudly that she wanted cake now, please. The celebration went on until long after sunset. People ate, people danced. People told stories about Eli that he'd forgotten about the time he'd helped dig the Millers out of a flood, about the fence he'd fixed for the Hendersons when they couldn't afford to pay about 100 small kindnesses that he'd done and forgotten, and that the town had apparently remembered. "You weren't as invisible as you thought," Rosie said, leaning against him as they watched their guests. "They were watching you the whole time, waiting for you to come back." "I didn't know." "That's the thing about being lost. You never see the people looking for you." Samuel came over with 2 plates of cake. He handed one to Eli, one to his mother. "Mrs. Miller says to tell you the dress is a wedding gift," he said. "She won't take money for it." "That's very kind of her." "She also said—" Samuel hesitated. "She said you remind her of her daughter, the one who died in the fever. She said seeing you happy makes her feel like maybe things can turn out right after all." Rosie's eyes filled with tears. "That's the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me," she whispered. Samuel shuffled his feet, clearly uncomfortable with the emotion he'd accidentally created. "Can I go now?" he asked. "George Miller said he'd show me how the forge works after dark. The fire looks different at night." "Go," Eli said. "But be back by midnight." "Yes, sir." He ran off, and Eli watched him go, and he thought about all the ways a boy needed a father. Not just for teaching, for permission, For the simple act of saying yes and go and I trust you. He was going to give Samuel all of those things, every day, for as long as he lived. The last guest left around 11 o'clock. Eli and Rosie stood in the yard together alone for the first time all day and looked at the house they would now share. "It's strange," Rosie said. "I've lived here for months, but it feels different now, fuller somehow." "It's not the house that's different." "No." She turned to face him. "It's us." He took her hand and led her inside, and when they passed through the door he stopped. "What is it?" she asked. "I just realized something." "What?" "I'm home." She smiled up at him, and it was the smile he'd been chasing since the first day he saw her in Hank's store, full and warm and completely, utterly real. "Welcome home," she said. The first year of their marriage was the hardest thing Eli had ever done. Not because of Rosie, not because of the children, because of himself. He'd spent 8 years building walls, learning to live without needing anyone, protecting himself from the pain of loss by refusing to let anything in. Now he had to learn a different way of living. He had to learn to be present at breakfast instead of disappearing into work before dawn. He had to learn to sit at the dinner table and actually participate in conversations instead of eating in silence. He had to learn to hold Rosie when she cried, which she did sometimes for Henry, for the life she'd lost, for the fear that had haunted her for so long. He had to learn to let her hold him too. That was the hardest part. The first time he woke up screaming from a nightmare about Martha and Rose, he tried to get out of bed and go outside the way he always had. Process it alone. Bury it deep. Rosie caught his arm. "Don't," she said quietly. "I don't want you to see me like this. I already see you. I've been seeing you since the day we met." She pulled him back down. "Stay. Let me hold you." "Rosie, stay." He stayed. And somewhere in the darkness, with her arms around him and her breath warm against his neck, he learned that grief didn't have to be carried alone, that there was room for two people in the dark places, that love wasn't about being strong all the time, it was about being weak enough to let someone else be strong for you. Samuel turned 11 in October. Eli took him out to the north pasture on his birthday, just the two of them, and taught him to shoot properly. Not just the mechanics of it, the why of it, the weight of responsibility that came with holding a weapon. "A gun is a tool," Eli said, "like a hammer or a saw. It can build things or destroy them. The choice is yours." "What did you use yours for?" "Both." Eli looked at the boy. "I've made mistakes, Samuel. Bad ones. There are things I did when I was younger that I'm not proud of." "Like what?" "Like walking away from people who needed me. Like letting my fear turn into walls." He paused. "Like spending 8 years pretending I didn't need anyone, when what I really needed was to stop being afraid." Samuel was quiet for a moment. "Are you still afraid? Every day?" "Of what?" "Of losing you. Your mother. Lucy." Eli met his eyes. "Of loving something so much that losing it would break me. But you do it anyway." "I do it anyway. Because the alternative, the walls, the silence, the emptiness, that wasn't living, that was just waiting to die." He put his hand on Samuel's shoulder. "Don't make my mistake. Don't wait until you're 40 years old to figure out that being afraid isn't the same as being weak." Samuel looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, "Can I call you Pa now?" Something cracked open in Eli's chest. "Yes," he said. His voice came out rough. "You can call me Pa." Samuel nodded like he'd just confirmed something he'd been thinking about for a while. "Okay, Pa. Can we keep shooting now?" Eli laughed. It surprised him, the sound of his own laughter, free and unguarded in the open air. "Yeah," he said. "We can keep shooting." Lucy's 7th birthday was in November. She demanded a party, a real one, with cake and decorations, and every child in Cooperton invited. Eli had never organized a children's party in his life. He had no idea where to begin. But he tried. He hung ribbons from the porch. He helped Rosie bake a cake that looked like a horse, Lucy's request. He even let Lucy put a ribbon around his horse's neck, General, as she still insisted on calling him and lead him around the yard so the other children could pet him. Halfway through the party, Eli found himself surrounded by 7 small children who wanted to know if he was really a cowboy. "Yes," he said. "Do you catch bad guys?" "Sometimes." "Do you have a gun?" "Yes." "Can we see it?" "No." "Why not?" "Because guns aren't toys." "But," Eli said, "tell your friends what happened to the snake." Lucy's eyes went wide with excitement. She launched into the story with the dramatic flair of a natural storyteller, complete with sound effects and hand gestures, and a completely fictional sword that Eli had apparently used to cut the snake in half. "That's not quite how it happened," he murmured to Rosie, who had come to stand beside him. "Let her have it. She's been telling that story for months. You're a hero in her version." "I'm not a hero." "You're hers." Rosie leaned against him. "That's all that matters." Christmas came cold and clear. They celebrated at the house, all 4 of them around a table that had once sat one person and now groaned under the weight of food and presents and the accumulated evidence of a family. Eli gave Samuel a new rifle. His own, actually, the one he'd carried for 20 years. He'd bought himself a new one. "This was my father's," he said. "And his father's before that. It's been in my family for 3 generations. Samuel held it like it was made of glass. I can't." "You can. You earned it." Eli looked at him. "You're my son now, Samuel. That means what's mine is yours." The boy's face did something complicated. He stood up abruptly and left the room. Rosie started to follow, but Eli stopped her. "Let me," he said. He found Samuel on the porch, rifle still clutched in his hands, shoulders shaking. "I'm sorry," the boy said without turning around. "I don't know why I just—" "You don't have to explain. My real pa he didn't have anything to give me. We didn't have anything. When he died, there was nothing left." Samuel's voice cracked. "And now you're giving me this, and I don't know what to—" Eli sat down on the porch step beside him. "Samuel, look at me." The boy turned. His face was wet with tears. "You don't owe me anything," Eli said. "Not for the rifle, not for the lessons, not for any of it. You're my son because I chose you, not because I expect something in return. But that's what family means. You don't keep score. You just love each other and hope you're getting it right." Samuel stared at him for a long moment. Then he leaned sideways and put his head on Eli's shoulder. They sat there in silence for a long time. When they went back inside, Rosie was waiting with hot cider, and Lucy was demanding to know when she was going to get her present. "Right now," Eli said. He pulled out a small box and handed it to her. Lucy tore off the ribbon and opened the lid. Inside was a silver locket the same size as the one Eli had carried for 8 years, but new, polished, without the weight of old grief. "Open it," Eli said. Lucy opened the locket. Inside were 2 tiny photographs. One of her father, Henry, the man she could barely remember. One of her mother. "I had them made in town," Eli said. I thought you might want to carry them with you. The way I carry—" He stopped. Lucy looked at the locket, then at Eli, then at her mother. "There's no picture of you," she said to Eli. "It's for your parents. You're my real parent too." Lucy's voice was firm. "Mama said so. She said when you got married, you became my pa. For real." Eli looked at Rosie, who was wiping her eyes. "That's right, sweetheart," Rosie said. "He's your pa now." Lucy nodded decisively. "Then I need a bigger locket, with 3 pictures." She put the locket around her neck and ran off to show Samuel, leaving Eli standing in the middle of the room with a feeling in his chest that he didn't have a name for. Rosie came and took his hand. "She loves you," she said quietly. "They both do." "I don't know what I did to deserve this." "You showed up. You stayed. That's all anyone can do." He pulled her close and held her, and over her shoulder he could see Samuel showing Lucy how to hold the rifle properly, and Lucy telling him he was doing it wrong, and both of them laughing. His family, his home, his life. On the first anniversary of their wedding, Eli took Rosie to visit Martha's grave. She hadn't asked to go. He hadn't planned to take her. But somehow, on that September morning, it felt right. They rode out together, just the two of them, and stood beside the wooden cross that marked where Martha and Rose were buried. "This is her," Eli said quietly. "Martha, and Rose, our daughter. She was 3. Rosie didn't say anything. She just stood beside him and let him talk. "I came here every year on the anniversary of their deaths. I'd stand here and tell them I was still here, like that was something to be proud of." He shook his head. "Surviving isn't the same as living. I didn't figure that out until you showed up." "What did you figure out?" "That they would have wanted me to be happy, Martha especially." He looked at the grave. "She used to say I was too serious, that I needed to laugh more. She would have liked you." "You think so?" "I know so. You would have driven each other crazy and loved every minute of it." Rosie smiled. "That sounds about right." Eli crouched down and placed his hand on the earth. "I'm not going to stop coming here," he said to the grave. "But I'm not going to come alone anymore. I've got a family now, a wife, 2 children." He paused. "I think you'd be proud of them. Samuel's going to be a good man. Lucy's going to be something. I'm not sure what yet, but something." He stood up. "I love you," he said to Martha. "I always will. But I love them too now. And I think that's okay. I think you'd want that for me." The wind moved through the grass. The sun was warm on their faces. Eli turned to Rosie. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For being patient. For not giving up on me. For showing me that there was more to life than just surviving." She took his hand. "Thank you for letting me in," she said. "I know it wasn't easy. Nothing worth having ever is." They stood there for a moment longer, 2 people who had lost everything, and found each other holding hands beside a grave that no longer felt like an ending. Then they walked back to their horses and rode home to their children and ate supper at a table that seated 4, and for the first time in 9 years, Elijah Thornton understood what it meant to be truly, completely alive. The summer of 1877 was the hottest anyone could remember. But Eli didn't notice the heat the way he used to. He was too busy teaching Samuel how to manage a ranch. Too busy listening to Lucy's endless questions about horses and snakes, and whether girls could be cowboys too. Yes, he told her girls could be anything they wanted. Too busy sitting on the porch with Rosie in the evenings, talking about nothing and everything, and all the years they had ahead of them. One night, as they sat watching the stars come out, Rosie said, "Do you remember what I asked you that first day, when my wagon broke down and you stopped to help? You asked if I was a cowboy." "That was Lucy." She laughed. "I asked you something else, later, when you came to check the fence." He thought back. "You asked me why I was really there. And you said you didn't know." "I didn't. Not then." "Do you know now?" He looked at her, this woman who had planted her feet in the dust and refused to walk away from him. This woman who had seen the walls he'd built and decided to knock them down anyway. This woman who had given him a family, a home, a reason to live. "Yes," he said. "I know now." "Tell me." He took her hand. "I was looking for a way out," he said. "Out of the silence. Out of the emptiness. Out of the grave I'd been digging for myself for 8 years." He paused. "I didn't know that's what I was looking for. But you did. You saw it before I did. I saw a man who was worth fighting for. Even when I couldn't see it myself. Especially then." He pulled her close, and she leaned against him, and they sat there together in the warm Texas night, with their children asleep inside, and their whole lives stretching out ahead of them. "I love you," he said. I know. I'm going to keep saying it, every day, for as long as I live. Good. She smiled up at him. Because I'm going to keep needing to hear it. He kissed her forehead, her nose, her lips, and somewhere deep inside, the man who had once called himself the Stone Man, a heart that had been frozen for 8 years, beat strong and steady and full of something he'd thought he'd lost forever. Hope, love, life. Elijah Thornton had spent 8 years building walls against the world. But in the end, all it took to bring them down was a widow with stubborn courage, 2 children who called him Pa, and the simple, terrifying, miraculous decision to let himself be loved again. The walls were gone now, and what stood in their place was stronger than stone. It was family. It was home. It was everything he'd ever needed, and everything he'd been too afraid to reach for, and everything that made the long, hard years of silence finally beautifully worth it. The Stone Man was gone. In his place stood a husband, a father, a man who had learned the hardest lesson of all, that the only way to truly live is to risk losing everything again. And Elijah Thornton, for the first time in 9 years, was ready to take that risk, every single day, for the rest of his life.